pleasure meeting you, Prof. I am really, really excited, to have this conversation with you. Congratulations on the conference that is being held in your honor.
Mm,
I feel that you fully deserve it.
thank you.
My pleasure. Can you please just again tell viewers, your name before we start?
Well, it's good that you said that because my name is very often mispronounced and
Oh, oh, okay.
misspelled sometimes, but it's Onookome,
Okay.
Okome,
Onookome,
Onookome, Okome,
Okome.
Okome. If you don't pronounce it properly,
Apparently,
then it won't mean anything in my language.
yeah. So what's the meaning? Would you like to
Actually,
share that with
it's
us?
funny. Yeah, because the first name is Who is my friend,
Hmm.
and then the second one's actually my friend.
Friend. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So you're one of the pioneering scholars of Nollywood movie and
Yeah.
industry. So what prompted you to actually veer into that field? Because I know when you um, were a student, there wasn't any. I mean, when you started, your academic career, there
Mm.
wasn't any serious, scholarship on Nollywood. So,
Well, to go back, actually, at the University of Ibadan,
yeah.
I wanted to write my dissertation on popular Yoruba cinema.
Cinema. Hmm.
And then it was possible to do that in theater arts. Okay. And so Professor Kwazi
Yeah.
then supervised that PhD program. But
Project.
before then, I had done work on the documentary films in the Institute of African Studies for my MA,
Okay.
University of Ibadan. For the
Ibadan.
MA, I did work on I did work on uh, the documentary films about African Nigerian culture, like
Okay.
J.P. Clark's Ozidi,
Ozidi. Yeah.
then Shoyinka's uh, um, film also.
Kongi's harvest.
No, I did Congress
Kongi's
Harvest, but this
harvest.
one was not my concentration on culture and transition.
Okay.
I worked on culture and transition,
Okay.
and because those were pioneer films about the African Nigerian culture.
Culture.
I was interested in that, but I was also interested in, say, Onitsha market literature,
Literature. Yeah.
right? So because I had done this dissertation on the transition from Yoruba theater into Yoruba's, what I then at that time called folkloric cinema in Nigeria.
Hmm.
My dissertation was on folkloric cinema
Cinema.
in Nigeria, dealing with Ogunde, Aye, Aaron Potiniyan, all
Yeah.
of those
All
films,
those.
Baba Salah's films. Uh, it was just a natural progression to move into Nollywood.
No.
Because don't forget that some of these Yoruba theater directors and theater practitioners also transited from
Yeah, from
making
the
film
stage, from this traveling
first
theater.
of all from the traveling theater tradition
Yeah.
into filmmaking
Making
on celluloid and then into
video.
filmmaking in video.
Yes.
So it was a natural thing, but my original intention was to study popular culture and how it actually um, that how it produces a different kind of episteme,
Hmm.
a different kind of knowledge,
Knowledge.
which is very important because it has a very large clientele, a very large audience, which we take for granted because they are not intellectual.
Intellectuals. Yes.
So when people write about African literature, for instance, African oral literature, the 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 the, the the focus is often on Shoinka, Achebe, but there's this other literature that is left unattended to, and this is the kind of literature I was interested because I always believed if from when I was this young boy living in Sapele, Delta State, growing up there, I was introduced to the Onookome pamphlets, and I thought that they
Yeah.
were funny and
Very, very funny.
hilarious, and so
Yeah.
I began to develop this interest in that kind of popular art, but I didn't have the facility to study them when I came to the university, because no university in this country has an
Actually,
archive of those
of those
films.
films
Yeah.
and the
It
literature.
was only
Yeah.
when I went to the University of University of Alberta that I realized that somebody had collected a huge chunk of the Onookome literature.
Really?
But yes, but then we had already started studying, myself and Professor Jonathan Haynes of
Yes.
Long Island University had already started the study of Nollywood,
Nollywood.
and
Yeah.
so sometimes I had to go back and say, okay, look, if you want to trace the trajectory of popular
Culture.
culture, right, in the 20th century, you have to go back there and look at how popular culture itself creates for the people, for the audience, its own meaning of social and cultural existence,
Hmm.
which is different from the kind of meaning that you get in, say, decolonized literatures like the one written by Achebe and
Shoyinka,
Shoyinka. So it is that
J.P. Clark.
epistemic value that I really wanted to capture, because I believe that they too have something to say, and that's the reason why Nollywood, for instance, is popular.
Popular. Yeah.
It is not because um, the elite watch Nollywood. No, it's because the ordinary people, the people in the street, watch Nollywood.
Yeah. So, given the fact that at this point in time, you're exploring an entirely new field,
Mhm.
were there any kind of resistance from any angle or any sort?
There was, in fact, when I made the proposal to do the PhD on on the movement from Yoruba popular theater to
Yeah.
Yoruba popular cinema, what I call at that time folkloric cinema,
Cinema.
um, there was resistance. And in fact, um, my proposal was not accepted. And
Really?
yes, in theater arts, because they said, well, maybe you should go to African studies.
Hmm.
So I went to African studies. I met one Adekbegba who said, one doctor, Professor Adekbegba, who said, well, you could actually work on Semben Osman and all of those people. Then we will find a way to do this with you. Because I was already familiar with them,
Yeah.
because I did my master's thesis on the documentary films there, right?
Yes.
But then Professor Hyginus Okwaze then came and said, no, 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 come over here. We can do it in theater. Why not? He himself studied film, and he went to the States and studied film. So he then said, look, I'll take you on. And then that was how I came back. But the biggest resistance actually
Yeah.
was trying to introduce courses
Hmm.
on Nollywood at the University of Calabar,
Clever.
where I went to teach after graduating the PhD in 1991. Uh, they Many of them couldn't understand why I was teaching. I wanted to teach Nollywood. Well, this is nonsense. This is a film for riffraffs. They don't know what they're doing. But I said, well, what is really interesting about Nollywood is, if you say they are not serious things, but people watch them.
Yeah.
Everybody, this is the only cinema that was made and is still being made in Nigeria by Nigerians, enjoyed by Nigerians. If you go into the streets in Calabar, in Lagos, and everywhere in the country, children even stay in the streets corner watching
Watching.
video films on
Yeah.
video parlors.
Hmm.
And so they let me be, because again I insisted that, well, let's do something about this. So there was resistance, and to tell you the truth, the resistance was, um, the resistance was kind of expected. The
Yeah.
Nigerian university system, as you know, is still very British.
Yeah.
It's still very British, very snobbish about popular culture, especially popular culture that has to do with our local artifacts, cultural artifacts.
Yeah.
So you could actually say, yeah, okay, but then it started changing gradually, especially when it was suddenly realized that the Nollywood, after 10 years in existence, less than 10 years in existence, uh, many people then realized that it was no longer just a national affair. It became a continental
Continental
affair,
affair. Yeah.
and then a global affair. And so people started taking notice, and that was when the scholarship picked up a lot. And this Jonathan Haynes himself was doing the Fulbright in Nigeria at the time, so
Yeah.
we connected at the American Studies Association. I think it was in Port Harcourt. I think it was in Port Harcourt. And we met there, and then the rest is history. So and this was in 1993, I think, and then we started collaborating and produced the first book,
Book.
not on Nollywood,
Nollywood.
but on African cinema. Yeah, it was on
On
African
African
cinema.
cinema. Yeah.
Uh, and then we did that book, and from there we just moved into talking about Nollywood.
Nollywood.
First, the importance of a film such as Living in Bondage. Why
Yeah.
is it important?
Yeah.
Why did why did people all over the country looked upon that film as something emblematic of wealth generation in
Yeah. In
Nigeria, right?
Nigeria.
So we
Yeah.
started with that, and then of course there were many films made after that, copying
Yeah.
that, just
About
as many people wrote about things fall apart,
yeah.
and then wrote stories that mimicked
Mimic things fall
things fall
apart.
apart.
Yes. Yes.
That was how it all started.
Yeah.
And then the first major conference on Nollywood
Yeah.
was a conference I convened in Bayreuth, the
In
University of
Germany. Yeah.
Bayreuth in Germany in 1999,
Hmm.
where they gave me money to invite scholars.
Scholars.
And then, of course, I invited Jonathan Haynes and some students who were just starting out there then at that point, and the scholarship picked up from that point. Actually, I would say that that point was really crucial to the making of the scholarship of Nollywood, because it then made Nollywood studies, in a sense, a respectable thing to
Kind of
do.
thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Because I was going to ask that how did you get materials initially? I mean, again, when you started these in Port Harcourt, because there were no
No, in Calabar.
scholar. I mean, Calabar,
Yeah.
because there were no, scholarship. At least nothing serious about Nollywood then. So I was
Well,
thinking about the challenges.
well, it's really easy, because what I did and what the early scholars such as Jonathan Haynes did with the essays we wrote. By the way, the first major essay on Nollywood was done in 1997. This is the essay we published in RAL in 1990, co-edited. Actually, we're giving money to when I made a proposal, and we're giving money to go to one of the Rockefeller centers in Bellagio, Italy,
Italy.
to write it up. And then we went there, wrote this thing up in 3 weeks. I think we stayed there for 3 weeks, yeah, Bellagio in Italy. And then we wrote this up. And then it was accepted by RAL.
Hmm.
And because it was accepted by RAL and the essay came out, I'll give you the reference to that essay later. And it then elevated the discourse
Yeah.
of Nollywood a
Nollywood.
little bit, because RAL is
I
it's
mean, yeah,
the
is the B
is
is
the
the
African
African
scholarly
journal.
journal,
Yeah.
right? So it raised that profile, and that was the very first time that Nollywood found itself. And then people began to found itself in a very reputable journal. And then people began to take notice of this particular kind of scholarship. And then, of course, things moved on from there.
So you've been involved in setting up Nollywood centers in in at least two universities,
Yes.
um, and again, so was that prompted by the interest? I mean, the renewed interest in Nollywood, or what? Why did you go into those
The
ventures?
reason was simple. As I said before, Nollywood scholarship, indeed, Nollywood production became very, very expansive. It's a lot of people got into the field, and they were producing like 1,000 films every month.
Every month, yeah.
So people began to really see the industry for what it is. And government took notice of this tremendous influence of Nollywood and the potential of bringing people into the field,
Industry, yeah.
into the industry. And at some point it was said that, in fact, during the Jonathan era,
Yeah.
the President Goodluck Jonathan era, the industry was providing like 4% of gross domestic earning for
For
Nigeria.
Nigeria, yes.
So it became something that the government was interested in, and so the schools began to take notice. And so when I was invited to Kwara State University,
Hmm.
Professor Nala was just taken off as the first vice
Vice
chancellor of that
Chancellor,
university.
yeah.
And I said, well, perhaps it may just be a good thing to set up a center like this as part of African studies, as part of English studies. And so we started
Hmm.
that process. And then after that, I think it was, no, it was first, was it? Yeah, it was Kwara State first. And then after the success of that, the Pan African University, then we did a conference where we invited all the big names in.
Yeah.
Listen to this,
Yeah.
not in Nollywood studies, but in African
Cons-
cinema.
Hmm.
Okay, so Professor Ukadike, Professor John McCall,
Hmm.
almost all the big
All the
names
big names.
I invited them to Lagos, and then we did this big conference. And it was at that conference that we said, look, let us do a Nollywood Studies Center. It's a center where you can not you go there not just only to study Nollywood, but to study
African
African
films.
screen cultures. But Nollywood is at the center, and from that point on, the center became a very important point for the study of Nollywood, and then they connected the organizers of the conference, the university administrators, then connected with the Nigerian Film and Video Censors Board,
Hmm.
and so they were able to digitize early films. So you can go there actually and get all kinds of things. The proposal we made was simply, look, this university will become the center for researchers coming from all over the
All
world
over the world.
to come study Nollywood. In other words, the idea was to generate the knowledge, the local knowledge about Nollywood
Hmm.
from that center, from Nigerians and from people who are interested in popular culture, and disseminate to the other parts of the world, which, as you know, was the other way
Right.
around. They create knowledge for us,
Yeah.
and then they export the knowledge to us
Hmm.
about ourselves. Okay, but for the very first time in the development of critical thinking, critical cultural thinking, this was the time that we actually uh, began discussing Nollywood from the inside,
Inside, yeah.
and spreading this idea to the
Hmm.
outside world.
From that stage, now we're talking about decolonization of Nollywood. I mean, from the a stage where we just accepted everything. Now it has developed to a stage where it's from the inside out. and then decolonization. But since we are still largely using Western,
Critical canon.
critical canon, and then Western gadgets,
Mhm.
as it were,
Mhm.
so decolonization, in what sense?
Look, one of the great things that Nollywood did was to domesticate the technology of filmmaking
Hmm.
and to create the cheapest means of making film ever. Don't forget that when Nollywood started, it was a straight shoot, a system of straight shooting on VHS cassettes and then mass dubbing the VHS cassette
Yeah,
for the audience, to
audience.
sell to the audience. It was the cheapest means of filmmaking ever, right?
Yeah,
So when you want to talk about decolonizing,
colonization.
for instance, it's also part of the whole business of domesticating the technology itself. It's part of the decolonization, and this is what Nollywood did. May not be a conscious thing, may just by default, right? But this is what Nollywood did. Nollywood is popular culture, right? It's
Yeah,
part of the larger popular culture, and as you know, popular culture does not pay grave attention to processes of decolonization as a conscious effort to rewrite something. Popular culture does in most cases is to simply create the artifact, and you will then read into it what you want to
what
read
you
into
want to
the
read. Yeah,
artifact. It's not a conscious movement, say like third cinema, that that's intellectual movement.
moment.
That filmmakers say, oh, now we want to deal with this European imperialists. We must break their stranglehold. We must do all of this. This is a conscious attempt. Nollywood is not Nollywood is not a cinema culture that actually made films based on this kind of projection, this kind of deliberateness in terms of articulating an ideological position. No, that's not Nollywood. And that is normally not popular culture, right? It's not like Nollywood is not art cinema.